In this lesson, we're going to zero in on free ranging versus controlled ranging. And the thing you have to understand is the homing nesting instinct of a layer is really, really strong. In other words, they want a home base. Their security. Remember, a chicken is really vulnerable. I mean, everybody likes chicken. You know, raccoons, possums, coyotes. I mean, you know, it takes something big to bring down a cow, you know, that sort of thing. I mean, a skunk isn't going to eat even a lamb. It's not going to take a skunk isn't going to take a lamb, but a chicken, everybody likes chicken. And so chickens instinctually feel fairly vulnerable. And so they have this incredible homing instinct for security, for a protected place. They'll range out, you know, 200 yards from their comfort zone. That's a 400-yard circle. Okay, well, a 400-yard diameter circle, you know, is like 20 acres. All right, so what we have found, our rule of thumb now is that unless you have more than 50 acres, you cannot get those chickens far enough with a completely free range eggmobile concept. You cannot get them far enough from a home base to keep them from coming back to it. Unfortunately, home base is always the back porch, the steering wheel on the tractor, the vise in the shop, and everywhere a chicken finds home base, she leaves a calling card, which when mama sits down on, mama ain't happy. When mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. We all know that story. Okay, so this 50-acre thing for us is kind of a benchmark. If you're over 50 acres, then the eggmobile could be an option for you. If you're under 50 acres, we recommend not an eggmobile. Pasture size is a big deal here, all right? So if you have 50 acres and they're really divided into really small, little small pastures with a lot of creeks and maybe some woods edges, so you've got this kind of carpet, a quilt mosaic effect of riparian, forestal, and pasture, and the pastures aren't very big, you can probably fudge on the 50 acres. But pasture size is a big deal. Now, the next kind of concept is a tiny coop with deep bedding. I mean, you can completely confine them, completely control, put netting or wire over the whole shooting match, and have a coop with a deep bedding exterior component that's covered, and have it that way. That's kind of the homestead model. I'm going to describe now the hybrid concept, where you have a smaller acreage and you still want the benefits of ticks and bug protection and all that sanitation that chickens do, but you don't have enough acreage to keep them from coming back to a home base all the time. I like the hybrid concept. The whole idea here is familiarity. We're going to talk about that through these lessons, but familiarity is the big deal. The chickens want to go to familiar territory. Typically, in eggmobile situations, if somebody comes up to me and says, I have this eggmobile, but the chickens keep laying in the fence rows. They don't lay in the eggmobile. The problem is you're not moving it enough. You've got to move that into unfamiliar territory frequently enough that the chickens are only familiar with the eggmobile. All right, well, what if you don't have very much land? That's where I like the hybrid concept, where you have maybe a mobile structure, but then once a week, maybe when you're there and you can watch for predators, or that you're there working around the yard or working around the house, all right, then you can open a door or prop it up on a bucket or something and let the chickens range out over your smaller acreage, and they will range over the whole acreage. But because they're only out one day a week, they never get enough familiarity in the small acreage to find a home besides the mobile shelter that you have them in. That's what I call a hybrid, where you have limited access, completely free range outside. You have limited access, but not so much access that they can create familiarity with something in that small acreage. Now, the thing to remember is that small flocks are more predator vulnerable than large flocks. There is a certain intimidation factor with a very, very large flock. There have been numerous studies, especially done in Australia, where, you know, side by side, a 100-bird flock versus a 1,000-bird flock. And routinely, the 100-bird, 50-bird flock gets picked off way sooner than the 1,000-bird flock. There's just a vulnerability in the small number. You know, the final part of this then is, do we go to a completely enclosed situation like the way we started? Well, we had the eggmobile, and then we went to the, you know, the retrofitted broiler shelters with the 10 nest boxes tucked under the corner, and ran that with our 1,000 layers, you know, early on. The beauty of that is you have almost no predation. The negative is you have way more labor because you're having to move the shelter, whether you move it by hand like we did or with a tractor. So, you know, again, in this pastured poultry industry, there is a real tension between the people that are making these big, you know, these big portable hoop structures that say, you know, nobody should completely free range their chickens because the predators pick them off, and, you know, and you lose half your flock and all this. So we actually pushed a pencil a few years ago on what would we have to lose in the open air, you know, the open access model before we went to a completely enclosed, moved every day in a completely secured shelter where the birds didn't go out onto free range. And it came out to right at 30%. So because of the labor savings and the additional ground and grass the chickens can eat, all those kinds of things, unless you're losing 30% to predators, you don't need to go to a completely secured system. Now, if you're in a place where you just can't get ahead of the predator loss and you are losing that much of a percentage, and maybe close to it, just for emotional, you know, it's a bummer to go out and find dead chickens, right? So if you just can't get ahead of your predator situation, then going to a pastured, a secured shelter, moved every day situation is certainly an option. And so you have this, you know, this question, you know, to range or not to range. That's the question, and you know, or I should say, to range with, you know, insecure versus, you know, a completely enclosed, and both systems can work. Both systems can work on the pasture, but they have to do with your land base, your flock size, your pasture size, your predator pressure, and those will help to frame the decision that you'll make regarding completely free range versus some sort of a secure. And remember, there's a hybrid. There's a hybrid to get the benefits, especially on a small acreage where you have limited access outside, but you limit the familiarity with all that surrounding, so the chickens never get familiar enough with a nesting problem. It's the familiarity and the predator that's the kind of the, you know, the nexus of this decision on ranging or not ranging.